All right, welcome back. So this section is all about AJAX. Now AJAX is something that I personally love in my own developer life to build apps with, but more importantly, as a teacher, I find it really fun and just enjoyable to teach. And that's mainly because, I'm not being cheesy here when I say this, but it opens up a whole new world of possibilities, of things you can do with your applications. You can suddenly make way better, cleaner, smoother, more interesting experiences for your users. And we'll see why in just a sec. But let's start with the basics. So as we already covered, it stands for Asynchronous JavaScript and XML, AJAX, which in today's landscape is actually not the best name. We'll talk more about why, but it really has to do with this last part, the X. AJAX doesn't really sound as good, ending with any other letter, but nowadays XML is just not as popular as it used to be, and it's been replaced, or usurped, depending on how you look at it, with another data format called JSON, which we'll cover in the next video. But for now, let's focus on asynchronous JavaScript. That's really the key, and something else that's not as important. So let's keep going, and we'll start by actually talking about what AJAX is not, because there's a lot of misconceptions about this. A lot of people think that AJAX is a library, which it's not. It's not a library. It's not a framework. And it's not a technology. It's none of these things. In fact, it's much, much simpler than any of that. It's not a tool someone created. Nobody owns it. Nobody developed it. All that AJAX is an approach to web development, a concept, a way of building websites. And that's really it. So this revolution that AJAX was just comes down to a different way of structuring apps, using existing tools and technologies. So just putting them together in a different way. So as this slide shows, around the year 2005, a little bit earlier potentially, there was tools that we use today, things like HTML, JavaScript was getting much more popular, CSS, the DOM, and then this other thing called XML HTTP requests, which we'll be spending more time on. But this is a tool or an API that allows you to make requests, make HTTP requests, it's kind of a mouthful, from the browser using JavaScript. So these 5 things, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, plus the DOM API and an API that gave you the ability to make requests from your browser, combined are what formed AJAX. And it wasn't one person, there wasn't an aha moment, at least that we can pinpoint in history. But over time, what happened is that a couple of kind of cutting edge developers and companies, Google was one of the first ones, kind of had a moment of saying, okay, wait a second. All these pieces are here for us to put them together to make applications that can update, that can change content dynamically without the page refreshing. So this is what it boils down to. AJAX is just taking existing technologies and just putting them together in a different way. If you're interested in this sort of thing, this is a blog post written by a developer named Jesse James Garrett back in 2005. And this is the first documented instance of the term AJAX. He is the guy who coined the term. Now, he's not the first person to use AJAX in a web app. He was just identifying a trend and naming it. But this is sort of like the genesis of that word and where everything kind of exploded from here after he wrote this post. I definitely recommend reading it. Things have changed a bit, but really not much. The key concepts are the same. And there's some great diagrams that talk about, the traditional web app flow versus the AJAX model. And the flow, basically, to sum it up, see how this is interrupted here? On AJAX, not interrupted at all, because there's this additional layer of JavaScript that's doing the back and forth for us, sort of the middleman. Furthermore, I really just say that, there's some nice updates down here, some Q&As, but it's just kind of a cool thing to see, nice little time capsule. And it also talks about some of the first apps to use AJAX or to use JavaScript client-side requests to their advantage. Things like Gmail, how you never have to refresh Gmail to get new items or new emails, or Google Maps, how you can load more of the map just by scrolling over. Those were kind of revolutionary and were some of the first apps to use AJAX, even before it had a name. So definitely check this out. So what it boils down to is that with AJAX, websites can send and request information or data from a server in the background. I should highlight that. In the background without disturbing the current page. So that's very different, and I'll show you an example in a moment, of how web apps used to work, and some of them still work this way, but the difference is very stark. And that led to today's single-page apps. That term, single page application, very popular, kind of buzzwordy, as well as frameworks that help you manage single page applications, things like Angular or Ember or even React. So all of this stems from AJAX. Okay, so here's a little illustration. If you use Pinterest, this might be familiar to you. If you don't, this is Pinterest. Now you can see what it looks like. And what's happening here is that as I scroll down the screen, new items are loading, right? So I don't have to click a button to take me to the next page. The page never refreshes. I never change the page that I'm on. This infinite scroll, which is not just limited to Pinterest, it's kind of a common feature on sites like Tumblr, and plenty of other sites out there. As I keep scrolling down, new content is loaded dynamically into the page using AJAX, mainly using JavaScript, which is going to get data in the background without disturbing the page, and then once it's back, it's adding it to the page relatively seamlessly. So that's done with AJAX. And compare that to the experience of using Reddit, one of my personal favorite sites I probably spend way too much time on. As I scroll down, I want more content, I click the next button, and notice what happens. It might be hard to see in this little video, but it refreshes the entire page. It starts me over at the top. There's an entire request that's made from the browser, not through JavaScript, basically starting the whole process over. So this is not using AJAX. This is kind of the old-fashioned way. So not AJAX. So here's really what's happening with Pinterest, just as a single example. So I hit the bottom of the page, and that triggers an event. JavaScript says, wow, the user scrolled to the bottom, go, go, go. Send a request to a server. It's probably some Pinterest, or definitely is Pinterest's own internal server they have set up for this. Send a request to our server and get more content. So then that sends a request to the server. And this is the key part. This is what's different. In the past, this would be a page refresh. This would be a separate request from your browser. But with AJAX, the ability to make a request through JavaScript, it just happens on the background while you're on this page. So it happens, the server is like, okay, yeah, here you go, here's the new content. It sends it back, and then with my JavaScript, once I have that data back, I was waiting for it, or the JavaScript was waiting, once it gets it back, then it inserts it into the page with some HTML. So it's not just inserting plain data, but it makes image tags and whatever these are, paragraph tags and link tags or A tags, and it just appends them to the page in this case. So that's a really common workflow. Get some data, some event triggers some request. That request goes off through JavaScript, gets data, it comes back, and then it's added to the page. So here's the entire workflow again. What really it boils down to is this. Sending that request to the server and getting more content. That's the key part of all of this. And it's what we'll spend a lot of time on in this section. How do we make those requests? There's a couple different ways. So we'll talk about the XML HTTP request. Then we'll talk about something else called the Fetch API, which is sort of the newer approach, but it's not quite implemented across all the browsers yet. And then we'll talk about third-party libraries, so additional things that aren't native to the browsers, like jQuery or Axios, that you can include yourself and use. So we're going to talk about a couple different ways, all of these ways here of making requests, and along the way, we'll build a couple of demonstrations in an app that illustrate how AJAX works, kind of the flow of putting those moving pieces together. Okay, so that is a quick intro to what AJAX is. Remember, it's the confluence of these technologies that allow us to make seamless web apps where data is being moved back and forth in the background, and the page is updated dynamically without the user having to refresh the page. All right,